data rights basically refers to who is allowed to access the data and what can they do with that data. Now, in most traditional IT infrastructure, this is typically enforced through some kind of technical control, which lately seems to be almost 99.9% of the time is Active Directory in our own environment. So Active Directory has this really great suite of tools that control who accesses what files where and what they're allowed to do with them. They've got this really complicated structure you can set up that can meet just about any organization's need. For all the complaining that we all do about Microsoft, they do have one heck of a product in Microsoft Active Directory, and it's used almost globally. I mean, everybody uses Active Directory. Well, maybe not everybody, but most organizations seem it's sort of emerged as the de facto standard. But the problem with Active Directory is it works great in the Microsoft environment, in the Microsoft ecosystem. But what about all this other stuff we talked about, right? So I talked about object storage and all these different mechanisms like platform as a service that are out on the internet. In fact, when I talked about Azure SQL, think back to my Azure SQL discussion. One of the things I talked about was how they do not support in Azure SQL. Azure SQL is a Microsoft product. It's a Microsoft technology. Active Directory is a Microsoft product and a Microsoft technology. But yet, in the cloud, Microsoft does not support Active Directory for data rights in their database engine in the cloud in Microsoft Azure SQL. So a lot of these things in the cloud we really can't control with Active Directory. Some things we can, a lot of things we can. And sometimes our decision as to how we use the cloud may be dictated as to whether or not we can integrate it with these technologies. So it's important to understand that. Important to think about that. You can't just automatically assume that you can use these existing mechanisms and technical controls within your environment and extend those to the cloud. It may not be possible, and you may want to make sure you find offerings that do fit into that model if that's what your desire is. As far as data rights, so data rights, they provide the ability to do auditing, so you know who accessed a file, when, and where. They allow you to expire access to files over time. They allow you to set controls, policy controls, in how people access that data, what they can do with the data. Can they save it? Can they print it? So, for example, if for example, when I read my ebooks on VitalSource or Bookshelf or one of those services, sometimes I have rights to print pages from the book. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I have rights to copy and paste. Sometimes I have a right to save it. Sometimes they don't give me the right to save it. Right. So all that can be controlled. Those protections can be configured with data rights management and support for applications and various formats.